Have you ever wondered how you learned the language you're speaking? Hi everybody, we're a group of students from the National University of Education, and today we're gonna talk about the language acquisition. We're gonna be covering the theories of language acquisition. These theories are the behaviorist theory, the innatist theory or mentalist theory, the monitor theory, the sociocultural theory of language learning, the acculturation model, and the intergroup model. Language is a cognition that truly makes us human. Whereas other species do communicate with an innate ability to produce a limited number of meaningful vocalizations, for example, chimpanzees, or even with partially learned systems, for example, the bird sounds. There is no other species known to date that can express infinite ideas, for example, sentences, with a limited set of symbols, the speech, sounds, and words. This ability is remarkable in itself. The behaviorist theory. The first coherent theory of language learning was the behaviorist theory. This theory was proposed by two famous people, Pavlov and Skinner. They used animals in order to experiment. This theory says that language is a mechanical process of habit formation and stimulus-response sequence. The behaviorist theory happens through a complex process of imitation. As you can see in the picture, there's a boy imitating his dad. Practice. As you can see in the second picture, there's a boy or there's a guy studying or practicing English. Reinforcement. As you can see in that picture too, there's a teacher helping her student. Habit formation and generalization. Skinner said that when learners produce something in the language they're asked for and positive reinforcement is added, habits start to form. Here are some of the behaviorist precepts. The first one, social environment. It's really important since it can affect learning in a positive or in a negative way. It's the place where learners develop their skills, so as you can see, it's indispensable. When it comes to the role of teachers, we cannot say that they're only the ones who check exams. That's not true. That's not fair. They're more than that. Actually, teachers have a lot of roles during their classes, during the learning activity. Number 3. Talking about errors, it's way better if they're corrected right away, they're heard by the teacher. They're not permitted in learning. Number 4. It's necessary that learners add repetition to their routines. As they repeat what they are learning, they will recall things in an easier way.
Now we are going to talk about innatist or mentalist theory. This theory was developed in America by Noam Chomsky in 1959. And let's start with the principles. 1. Language is universal. 2. Each person was born with innate ability to use another language. 3. External facts don't affect language learning. And 4. Having correct or incorrect response doesn't mean learning is done. This theory was introduced as a result of the weakness in the behaviorist theory. And Noam Chomsky argues that behaviorists cannot provide sufficient explanation for children's language acquisition for the following reasons. 1. Children come to know more about the structure of their language that they could be expected to learn on the basis of the samples of language they hear. The language children are exposed to include false starts, incomplete sentences, and slip of the tongue, and yet they learn to distinguish between grammatical and ungrammatical sentences. And 3. Children are by no means systematically corrected or instructed or language by parents. So, in conclusion, this theory says that the children are biologically programmed for language, and the language develops in the child in the same way of other biological functions. And finally, we can say that the language acquisition is the same as learning to walk. It's all in your mind.
Monitor theory. This theory was proposed by Stephen Krashen in 1982. He developed this theory in terms of 5 hypotheses. The first one is the acquisition learning hypothesis. Acquisition referred to learning that was unconscious, while the learning portion was considered conscious learning that happened in the classroom. The second is the monitor hypothesis. This says information that the acquisition center produces will be monitored, and if it doesn't match the correct information, change will be made. The third is a natural ordering hypothesis. This simply says that there is a natural ordering to grammatical features of learning language. The fourth is the input hypothesis, which states that if students receive comprehensible input or input that is easily understood, student learning will increase. The last hypothesis and the monitor model is the affective filter hypothesis. Affective filter says that a mental screen can be raised to filter information from reaching the acquisition center, which decreases acquisition of language.
Sociocultural theory of language learning. This theory was proposed by Vygotsky in 1987. This theory works within a sociocultural perspective because they assume that there are a dialectical relationship between culture and mind. Also state that the learning is first social and then individual, in order that the learners construct knowledge and this knowledge is later internalized. This theory focuses on the integration of the social, cultural, and biological elements.
The Acculturation Model by John Schumann for acquiring a new language. Schumann claims that acquiring a language is a part of the process of acculturation. Acculturation is the merging of cultures. A person maintains their original culture but adopts practices or aspects of a new culture. Failure to learn a language can be explained by social and psychological distance between the two cultures involved. The bigger the social distance, the more difficult it will be for the learner to acquire the new language. There are 8 factors that can influence the social distance between cultures. 1. Social dominance, if one group exerts power over another. 2. Integration, are they two groups integrated? 3. Enclosure, self-sufficiency increases distance. 4. Cohesiveness, tight-knit groups are more distant. 5. Size, large groups are more likely to be distant. 6. Cultural congruence, distance is dependent on cultural differences. 7. Attitude, negative attitudes to the target culture increases distance. 8. Length of stay, short time equal more distance. There are also 3 factors that can influence psychological distance of the individual. Number 1. Motivation. 2. Attitude. 3. Culture shock. These only factor in if social distance influences are neutral. So, Schumann's theory does not help teachers plan instruction. Rather, it points out social and psychological aspects we should acknowledge. As teachers, we should create a classroom that builds positive social relationships. We can encourage bilingualism and biculturalism.
The intergroup model. This emphasizes ethnicity and the issues of social inequality as a social factor in second language learning. According to Howard Giles in 1982, language learners tend to define themselves in ethnic terms and identify with their own group. So he said that this is a theory which also takes into account the relationship between the learner's group and the language group. Unlike a culturation model, intergroup theory emphasizes the dynamic nature of the interaction between the groups, specifically groups with different ethno-linguistic identities.
Finally, we're gonna give our conclusions about the topic. The behaviorist theory was the first one that was accepted by the community. Mainly, it says that there are some steps we need to keep in mind when we're learning a language. These steps are imitation, practice, reinforcement, habit formation, and generalization. It also sets some points such as the role of the teacher, the importance of the social environment, correction of errors, and repetition. All these things together can help us get to the point when we realize we're actually learning a language. Chomsky's hypothesis of innateness is one of the many theories that has transformed the studies of language acquisition with its ideas about the innate knowledge of universal grammar and the theory that the first language is acquired by instinct. Monitor theory refers to acquisition as a process of mental, personal, and inner evolution in which students do not need to speak or write to learn. According to this model, learning takes place automatically when learners listen or read and they receive fragments of the target language. The language that students produce when speaking or writing is the result of learning and not the cause of it. Social and psychological factors affect the extent of the learner's capacity to learn his or her second language. Schumann asserts that the more distance created between the second language learner and his or her target language culture by such factors, the less contact he or she will have with the target language culture, and thus the lower will his or her expected second language proficiency be. He also considers the social factors to be the prime influences. The psychological factors come into play and become the deciding factors only in situations where the combined social factors create neither positive nor negative circumstances for the learner. No doubt, the social aspect is not detached from the learning process because, as we know, any acquisition of learning is a result of interaction with a social environment, and every aspect we learn will be part of our cognitive development.